Okay, Craig, thanks very much for joining us on the podcast today. How are you, buddy?
I'm good. Thank you for the invitation. It's great to be here.
That's awesome, mate. It's been a while since we saw you over in Boulder, in Colorado, which was back in 2013. I think it was actually maybe celebrating your birthday just at that time. I seem to remember somebody bringing in a big birthday cake.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. I mean, I remember we were doing a book signing. We just launched the
That's right.
photo book, and I think we're at Sunglass Hut in Boulder.
Correct.
And
Yes.
we're always in. My wife and I, our birthdays are in late June, 2 days apart, and yeah, for about a decade and a half now, we've celebrated in Boulder, so that makes sense.
Yeah, perfect. Believe it or not, it's also my wife's 47th birthday coming up in a couple of weeks' time. She's
Yeah.
3 days apart from yourself as well. And here's a little quip of factoid information here. She's also a physiotherapist, and I know you
Oh.
studied physiotherapy. Did you ever get a chance to actually sort of practice as a physio, or was it just something which you've then moved on to professional sport?
I never practiced in the sense that I got paid, but I practiced the knowledge every day in my career. So
Of
um,
course.
maintaining my body, I guess, in a good state for operating at a high level, and just the knowledge in and around the degree was very helpful. But never actually practiced in the sense that I got paid as a physio. So my wife
Yeah.
always reminds me of that when I tell people that I'm a physio. She said, "No, actually, you've never practiced. I don't know if you can say that." So. Um,
Absolutely. Do you ever find yourself giving that sort of a specific advice to some of the athletes that you're coaching? Even if it's a non-professional sort of advice, just things about certain injuries and stuff. I would imagine you've amassed a huge amount of experience over the years with different injuries, etc. So,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of the younger athletes I train with and the questions I get asked that sort of tie into those topics that you mentioned, I always fall back on that knowledge, the specific knowledge that I've gained through experience, but also just the knowledge that was based in the research and the science that I learned in my degree that still holds true today. So, yeah, no, I often delve out advice. And when people know you're a physio, at a party or a barbecue, for argument's sake, they always tell you they've got a sore shoulder, a sore knee, or something. So yeah, I'm always quick to delve out the advice.
absolutely. You've always struck me as somebody who's been managed to keep their engine and whole body sort of thing held together quite well. But what sort of specific injuries have you dealt with over the years yourself? And how have you got through those periods? Obviously, there's some very common injuries which people tend to suffer from. So just as a quick snippet of information for some of the people listening.
Yeah, I've been pretty lucky. I mean, through that knowledge I had, and I mean, I was halfway through my physio degree before I started doing triathlon, so I understood very early the importance of good functional movement for not only performance and efficiency, but for injury prevention. So I always was high on that, and most of the enforced layoffs I've had actually were illnesses, not injuries.
Okay.
In 2002, I wanted to go to the Manchester Com Games, and I made the train on squad, but I missed the final selection races because I had the chicken pox. 4 years later, actually, the Melbourne Commonwealth Games, I sort of had my heart set on making the team, but again missed the selection races because I got another liver virus,
Oh, wow.
CMV virus, actually. Yeah, so early in my career, though, when I started running a lot, I got shin splints, which I think is a pretty common one, and went and saw a mate of mine who was already a qualified physio, and he obviously treated the symptoms and the problem, but he also did a full body examination, and he said, and it was, they say everything happens for a reason. It was actually a blessing getting those little injuries early on because he said to me, you haven't got great core strength and stability, so it's something you might want to work on. So while I was actually rehabbing the shin pain, I actually got stuck into a really good core strength and stability routine, which I've progressed and adapted and still use to this day, 25 years on. So I think
Wow.
I was pretty lucky on the injury front. I had a couple of broken ribs in 2004. I got hit by a car whilst cycling, and again in 2011 I picked up a respiratory virus, and I coughed so much that I broke two ribs.
Oh, nasty. Yeah.
Yeah, so a lot of those injuries didn't actually come from overuse or I guess the wear and tear that you might think through
Yeah,
our three
absolutely.
disciplines. But you still inevitably, I think if you're in the sport long enough, you deal with, and I'm sure you've seen it with swimmers with shoulders and upper body injuries. I mean, any, I guess, activity that requires repetitive motion over time, there's always that use of overuse. So you really need to be very careful with your functional movement, your strength and conditioning, and all those things. And yeah, as I said, I was lucky just having the knowledge from the physio degree that it's something I always placed paramount importance on.
Yeah, it sounds like it really stood the test of time there, which is fantastic. Now, you did your first triathlon in 1993, and I was going to ask you the question. It almost seemed, following your career, it almost seemed like you just suddenly appeared on the scene at 70.3 in Ironman, but of course that's never really the case, right? But answering what you just mentioned there about the Commonwealth Games in both Manchester and in Melbourne, that would probably explain why I would have sort of taken that perspective of you just suddenly being this all-round 70.3 / Ironman athlete, but not so much on the Olympic distance. Was Olympic distance something very important to you in those early days, or were you always thinking a little bit more on the longer side of things?
Well, the race in Hawaii was the first race I ever saw, and that attracted me to the sport. And, I played football, soccer until I was 20. But I'd been interested in triathlon for about 3 or 4 years before I actually did one. And, I had seen Hawaii on television, and also triathlon was getting mainstream media back then. It wasn't unusual to flick the telly on and see races in the US like the St. Croix Half Ironman or the Chicago Triathlon. And we were fortunate in Australia. We had a lot of great athletes who were winning races all around the world. So, the sport was getting some mainstream media, and we had a couple of series in Australia that used to get sort of mainstream media coverage. But I guess if you're a 25-year-old athlete now, going into Tokyo this year, it would have been the 6th time that triathlon was in the Olympics. But we're talking about the mid-90s when it hadn't been in the Olympics at all. So I hadn't sort of really seen the Olympic distance. Of course, having it in Sydney for the first time whet my appetite for it. And no, I did not a lot. I did my first race as a professional athlete was an ITU World Cup race on the course in Sydney. It was a test event for the actual Olympic Games, and I was still in university. I was a third-year physio student. I finished 8th in that race. And because I was at uni full-time, I wasn't on the circuit, so I didn't do another ITU race for 12 months.
Right, okay.
At the end of 1996, I did the ITU World Cup race in Auckland, New Zealand, which I finished 4th in. But then it was another 12 months until I did another one, which was the Sydney World Cup race in 1997, and I finished 9th that day. So, I was in or around the top 10. The truth is, at that point in ITU racing in Australia, we had a lot of depth.
Yes.
The 3 big names were Welsh, Bevan, and Miles Stewart, all accomplished triathletes, world champions, World Cup winners. They were our big 3, and they were the 3 who probably would have gone to the Olympics. One of them did, Miles. Welsh, unfortunately, had to retire because of his heart condition in 99, and Brad, unfortunately, got hit by a car before one of the selection races. So he never quite fulfilled his potential. And he was one of our greatest ever ITU athletes. I think still to this day, Brad has won more ITU World Cups than any other Aussie. So
he was an absolute beast, that's for sure.
Yeah. I certainly know he won the series 3 or 4 times, maybe even more. But to answer your question, in '93 I did actually biathlons. I did a whole lot of biathlons before I did triathlons because they were so common in Australia. Most surf clubs put them on.
The biathlon being the swim and run using the modern pentathlon rules. Is that right? Yeah. It's certainly how I grew up as well doing that. Yeah. It was quite well weighted towards the swimming though, as I recall.
They used to mix the distances up. You could do anything from a 300-metre swim to a 2K run up to a 750-metre swim and a 5K run. And a lot of the surf clubs had them on a regular basis, a Friday or a Saturday every weekend. And there was actually a couple of really well-organised ones. I know in Sydney we had one called the Champion of Sydney Biathlon. We had the Bronte to Bondi. So you would swim at Bondi and then run to Bronte.
Oh, wow.
So there's a lot of well-organised ones. And I did 8 or 12 months of those before I ever did a triathlon. But to answer your question, I did really want to do the Olympics when it came on the scene. And obviously after watching the Sydney Olympics in my hometown and a guy who I trained a lot with, Simon Whitfield, won the race.
Yes, absolutely.
Racing for Canada. And I think that whet everybody's appetite, particularly the Australian athletes seeing an Olympics on home soil. And so, I set my sights on the Commonwealth Games 2 years later. And so I guess the first stepping stone to qualification for that, I went to the Australian Championships at Mooloolaba, which was an ITU race, and I finished 3rd. and qualified for the World Championships team for the ITU Worlds that year, which was in Edmonton, in Canada. Battled a couple of injuries that year, but went to the Worlds and got on the train-on squad for Manchester, but then got the chickenpox late 01, early 02, which sort of sidelined me. Obviously, I didn't make the team because I missed the selection races for Manchester and for the ITU Worlds that year, which were in Cancun, Mexico.
Very hot that year.
Yeah. So
yeah.
I guess I had to find something else to do. It was a long rehab after being very sick with the chickenpox for 3 months. And, ultimately it led me to the US to race. The Australian coach at the time said to me, and rightly so, because I wasn't on the team for Com Games or Worlds that year, that I probably wasn't going to get a World Cup start for 12 months, which was understandable because I had to prepare the team for both those major championships. But as a professional athlete, I needed to find something to do. So I ended up going to the US for the first time to race. And, in fairness, I was probably always going to end up there anyway because they were the races that I'd read about and seen on television. And I went there in 02, trained in San Diego, and really found my niche there. I loved the racing. I mean, I ended up racing all the guys who went to Manchester anyway. I remember racing.
It's a great spot with Stuart and those guys,
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of the races I did in 2002 in the US, for instance, the LA Triathlon, I raced Simon Lessing, who'd just come from Manchester and the Com Games. You also had Craig Walton, Paul Amy, Olivier Marceau, who was an ITU world champion, Spencer Smith, who was a 2-time ITU world champion. It was one of the best Olympic distance fields I ever raced, actually, was the LA Triathlon in 2002. Brad Bevan was in the race.
Yeah, it was a monster.
Yeah, so you had 3 or 4 of the ITU world champions. Obviously, Lessing had accumulated 4 or 5 ITU world titles. You had a lot of guys who'd podium at Worlds, like Paul Amy and Craig Walton. And you also had a lot of the guys who were doing the non-drafting circuit, like Conrad Stoltz, Matt Reed, Mark Lees, Greg Bennett. And I just really enjoyed that style of racing. So that's where I entrenched myself for the next 3 or 4 years. And my main races each year were races like Chicago, LA, the Lifetime Fitness Triathlon, which was a big money race in Minnesota. And they were all Olympic distance races where I would race Simon Whitfield, Hamish Carter, Bevan Doherty, Simon Lessing, Craig Walton, Greg Bennett. And I really enjoyed that scene. I was able to get sponsors for the first time in my career, and understood what it was to be a professional athlete, racing on a circuit that had high visibility, high coverage. You understood how it worked, the return on the investment that the sponsors wanted by racing in those sorts of markets. And don't get me wrong, I would always look at the ITU races and think, should I be doing them? And I do 1 or 2 a year. I think if you look back through my career, I didn't do any in 02 because of the chickenpox. 03, I think I did 1 in Geelong. I finished 4th. Craig Walton won that one. Hamish Carter was 2nd. Bevan Doherty was 3rd. I came 4th. So I was racing in great company because Hamish and Bevan went on to get the Olympic gold and silver medals 6 months later in Athens. And I guess as an athlete, you do see the Olympics, and I'm not going to say that I wasn't enamored with it. But by then I had a couple of sponsors, and there was a lot of restrictions around logos in the ITU, what you could wear. You had to wear the national uniform. And, I think at that point in its evolution, particularly its involvement in the Olympic Games, that it only had one involvement in Sydney. And, triathlon at that point was like a lot of sports, I guess, like golf and tennis. And, they are in the Olympics, but there's other circuits outside of that. And, I was really enjoying the racing. As a competitive athlete, you want to race the best in the world. And, in Olympic distance racing, I was getting to race the Simon Whitfields, the Hamish Carters, the Craig Waltons, the Greg Bennetts 3 or 4 times a year at LA, Chicago, Lifetime Fitness in Minnesota, which was, at that time, it was the highest prized purse in the history of our sport, the Battle of the Sexes format. And by the time, I guess, 04, I was lucky enough to win LA and Chicago. 05, I won the Lifetime Fitness race. So I was starting to scratch all the itches that I had with the short course racing. And look, to where I eventually knew I'd always end up, which was Hawaii. 2000.
And during that period, then, sorry to just butt in there very briefly, but during that period, 2000 to 2004, obviously, as you say there, Sydney was 2000. I was actually Blessing's swimming bitch over in the UK, training up for Sydney and trying to get him prepared and ready for that. And it's a slightly disappointing result for him, obviously, in Sydney, but getting up at that point. And certainly in that next 4 years, the standard of swimming just seemed to go absolutely through the roof. Were you experiencing that over in the US as well, presumably with the guys who are contenders for Athens and then even on to Beijing? Could you feel that sort of process happening?
Absolutely. And I think one of the best things that ever happened to our sport was the inclusion in the Olympic Games, because I think it was important for our status globally as a sport. And we were a sport that at one point athletes would, within the course of a season, do all distances. And you're able to do it because the guys and girls that you were racing were doing the same thing. I think at some point, and I want to say it was around 2000, specialization became much more important. Obviously, IT racing became draft legal. Swimming became very important. And draft legal didn't certainly mean easy on the bike. It meant a little bit more tactical, but it was very hard racing. And I think it was very important in our sport because it became important then to specialize. You had to pick a distance or maybe two distances within a season, and it became that competitive. And I guess that's the standard improved that much that by necessity, that's what you had to do. So I certainly know that when I was racing in the US, the short course races, the Olympic distance races, when you'd go to Chicago or Lifetime Fitness or LA and you'd have the guys coming from the ITU circuit, I needed to do 6 or 8 weeks of a lot more swimming.
Yes, yeah.
So I would prepare for that every year in Lifetime Fitness. Hamish was there, Simon was there, great swimmers. So Craig Walton, you had to really lift your swim game. And I don't want to say to a lesser extent, it was the same situation even 5 or 6 years later when I was an Ironman athlete. I knew every year in Kona after an Olympic year, you'd have the influx of the ITU guys stepping into Ironman. That would mean a much quicker swim. So I know in 2009, going into Kona as defending champion, it was a post-Olympic year and there was a lot of guys like Andy Potts, Rasmus Henning, Dirk Bockel, Andreas Raelert, guys who'd been entrenched in the ITU circuit, had finished top 10 at the Olympics. And obviously Andy was an Olympic trialist for swimming.
Amazing swimmer. Amazing.
Yeah, swam at the University of Michigan. So when they came into Ironman racing, I knew in 2009 that was going to make it a much quicker swim, and I prepared for that. And it was a much more select group, the front group that year. So they were all.
It's a really interesting observation. Never really thought about it like that, but brilliant observation for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you see that still continuing to this day? Obviously, next year is going to be different, of course, with the Olympics being postponed and stuff. But that standard of swimming just goes up and up and up and up. I remember when we were in the UK training up for Sydney, or with the team training up for Sydney, it was suddenly all about the swim. Like everything was about the swim. It was almost like you don't really need to ride now. So the young junior athletes, which was myself and some of the other guys, we almost ditched a lot of the biking for the swimming and for the running, and we really lifted the game there. But when I moved and emigrated over to Australia, which was in 2001, I came across and raced Malouda Bar with yourself in the elite race and got absolutely smashed to pieces. I don't mind saying. But it was really noticeable moving over to Australia just how much better the Australian cyclists were within triathlon. So I'd done very, very little time trialing work. I could sit in a pack, I can have the tactical stuff and all that. But, when you get a non-drafting race, I was rubbish and I was getting just shelved basically all the way. And, I think yourself, with all that experience with the Lifetime Fitness and the non-drafting races over in the US and stuff, it's obviously just do you reckon it's maybe sort of formed some of that more sort of a rounded athlete who doesn't really have a weakness in any of the three disciplines, just strong across the board?
Yeah, and I think you see it now. It's gone full circle because I want to say a lot of the national federations for all countries train their athletes up that way so that you don't have a weakness. And if you watch certainly ITU racing the last 5 or 10 years, you've got to be world-class in all three disciplines. You can't afford to miss that front swim group if you have designs on the podium. And then the front group doesn't muck around like maybe it once did. It's straight on the gas. And then you've got to be able to run 30 minutes for 10K or under that. So I think, again, that's been the evolution of the sport. And I guess I was lucky early in my career. I had great mentors. And one thing I remember Greg Walsh saying to me, and I think it was in early 1997. So I was still at university, but I got called into the Australian team for a training camp down in the snowy mountains in Thredbo. And I was lucky enough that I got to train and live with some of my idols in the sport for 2 weeks. And, I used to sidle up next to Greg, and I was like a sponge absorbing all this information. And one thing he always said was, you want to have more than one string to your bow. You want to be a well-rounded athlete. You want to be able to get in that front group in the swim. But if you miss that front group, you want to have the bike strength to be able to bridge across. You want to be able to win races in many different ways, if possible. And he said, you've got to understand in a triathlon, until further notice, the race does finish with a run. So you need to be able to separate, but there's going to be selections along the way, like a front swim group, a bike group. You want to keep making the selection and then be able to differentiate yourself towards the end of the race. So that was some advice that always stuck with me. And it makes sense, I guess, if in anything in life, whether it be business or any sort of sporting skill, you want to have you want to upskill as much as possible and have a range of ways so you're not just, I guess, one dimensional. And that became even more obvious to me the more I raced guys like Lessing and, the Croc early in my US career. And granted, they were coming to the end of their career, but it's one of my fondest memories as a fan of the sport, getting to race those guys, in races like Chicago and LA, and guys I'd watched on television for a decade. And, if you mention names like that, and these days, I guess the modern day equivalents are your Alistair Brownlees, your Javier Gomez's, Jan Frodeno's. There are no weaknesses. There are no weaknesses. And I think even the modern day guys have taken it a step further, because now with the technology in and around what we know with nutrition and bike fit and aerodynamics, you've just got to be the full package to even be in the ballpark of those athletes that I mentioned. So, yeah, it was evident to me early on that, and again, growing up in Australia in the sport in the late 90s, I started, I guess, my first pro race was 95. I am racing guys like those names that I mentioned. And, you would remember from those races like Mooloolaba in 01, you'd have Craig Walton off the front, maybe with a Ben Sanson or a Hamish Carter. And, you'd be in a bike pack with Chris McCormack and Greg Bennett and Miles Stewart. And, those guys are not mucking around. They want to get to the front because they want to win. So you have to be able to ride. And I just, it's the old saying, a rising tide floats all boats. You saw what the level was, and you either got yourself to that level or aspired to get there, or found another pastime.
I think my other pastime actually rapidly became coaching. Actually, at that point, I just saw how much I got smashed. I turned up with this $400 road bike because I'd been traveling around Southeast Asia, grew my hair long and stuff like that. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to get back into triathlon as soon as I'm here in Australia. And I did a few local races and did okay. And then I thought I'll fly over to do this great race over in Mooloolaba, and they just got absolutely annihilated. And it was a real somber, sobering moment at that point in time for sure. Yeah. But there we go. Dave Scott, Ironman legend, very famously mentioned that he believed that you were the first true men's champion in many, many years. That must have been a very nice feeling, something nice, for somebody like Dave to actually say, Dave being very well rounded himself and being able to win in all different sort of distances and in conditions as well. That must have been a great thing to hear from him.
Yeah, I think, you hear people say all the time, you don't race for the accolades, or and you don't. You have more intrinsic motivations. You I can only speak for myself, but I love the challenge that the sport of triathlon presents, trying to master 3 different disciplines and racing on all different courses, some hilly, some flat, some wetsuit swim, some non-wetsuit. You have to get a range of skills. But to hear that kind of, I guess, endorsement from someone like Dave, that was one of the favorite things I ever read that was written about me, because, when you're a sports fan, and I grew up playing soccer or football and loved it. And the award that, you love to get player of the match, but the award that all players loved was the Players Player Award.
Sure.
When somebody else who understands what it takes, gives you credit. That means a lot. I was fortunate to win some awards from the media and our national federation, and they're all humbling, and you love to win them, but to hear credit like that from Dave, it did mean a lot to me, because obviously he won in Hawaii 6 times, and he set the bar really, and was a pioneer on the men's side anyway. Inspired generations of athletes to follow. So that was really nice to read. And it's one thing, I guess, I think at the time you think, oh, that's really nice, but it's more something you reflect on when you get in the twilight of your career, because you get a little more philosophical and you think, well, what was it all about? What was it all for? As much as I loved it, and it was able to become my livelihood and my profession, and it was always a passion. I think the things that really stick with you and that mean a lot is if you've been able to impact other people or inspire other athletes or get other athletes' attention, and that kind of praise from Dave. It's something I look back on and think, it was one of the nicer things that I read about myself for sure throughout my career.
Definitely. I think, having done triathlon myself in the late 90s, early 2000s and stuff, and reading something like that, and also knowing what the sport was like at that point in time. I know when it shifted to draft legal and Olympic distance, going to the Olympics, etc., there was very much this feeling that, okay, well, the sport is getting a little bit soft at that point. People used to think, okay, non-drafting legal races, the hard men come out and the guys who can swim, bike and run and be all great at all three. But there was definitely this lull around about the early 2000s where there was almost this period of, I wish we could just go back to the days of the Brad Brevins and the Simon Lessings, where the guys who were the all-round package were actually winning all three things. And, things have changed these days. You'd never say to an Alistair Brownlee, hey, you're not the all-round package, because he certainly is, of course, now. But there was definitely that period, I felt, where triathlon almost seemingly went backwards to go forwards at that point. And and obviously, getting that sort of certification, as it were, from Dave, and just sort of saying that's absolutely fantastic. Yeah.
Well, I think, I remember that time well, and I think that's why after the Sydney 2000 Olympics and maybe the 2002 Com Games, a lot of the guys came to the US to rediscover that style of racing that you mentioned. I know Lessing moved there full time. Hamish Carter was a regular on the US circuit. Bevan Doherty, Greg Bennett, Craig Walton, all those guys showed up again in 2002 after being on the ITU treadmill for a while. And, I want to say it was guys like Jan and Alistair who probably changed the sport again and the perception.
I think so, yeah.
They were like you mentioned, sort of, I guess maybe 05, 06, definitely if you look at the Olympics in 08, Jan winning and Snowy on the women's side, and Javier Gomez up there and those sorts of guys, I think, and girls, that they were the ones who, but I do remember there was a lot of that sentiment around, like you just mentioned, and maybe that's why a lot of those names turned up in America again after the US circuit was sort of like that in the sort of early to mid 90s, and then maybe people drifted away to try and make the Olympics. And then I think everyone showed up again in like sort of 02, 03 again. But certainly by the end of that decade, ITU racing was firmly established. I remember Alistair coming on the scene, I think it was in 09, as a young man and just running the table. He won every race.
He won everything, every single race in 2009, yeah.
Unbelievable season. One of the great seasons ever. He just went off the front in every race from the gun. So,
yeah, it was absolutely fantastic. I remember 2008 in Beijing when, he was right up there in the mix on the run, and obviously faded a little bit towards the end when you could just sort of see him overheating a little bit, but you knew big things were coming in 2009. So, Craig, during this period then, the last sort of, let's say 8-10 weeks or so with COVID-19 and coronavirus circulating the world, how much of an impact has that had on your coaching career these days? And care to sort of reflect a little bit on what this last sort of period has been like for you?
Yeah, it's been interesting. I think what we've seen globally is unprecedented in terms of not only in our realm, the sporting realm, but economically, the impact on people's livelihoods and just the uncertainty. Tragically, we've seen people get very sick and die. So it's been eye-opening, and like all things, I think if you pay attention, they're educational and there's a lot to be learned. So, there's some things that are out of our control as individuals. And certainly I think the environment around what's happened with the pandemic, with COVID-19, we've been passengers, but I think you can get a sense of what you need to do to batten down the hatches, and also what the world post COVID-19 is going to look like. And I always, I like to look at the glass as half full. As bad as things get, I think I always like to think there's light at the end of every tunnel. And I think it's important from your mental health standpoint to have that sort of an outlook. As bad as things get, there's going to be another beautiful sunrise at some point, and you need to prepare yourself to capitalize on that mentally, emotionally, physically, financially, all of those things. So, I was at the point, I'm 47, as you mentioned, in a month. And
in a month, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, so, I mean, I still love to race. I raced 5 times last year. I think the last 5 years I've averaged between 3 or 5 races a year. When I do race, I like to put out a performance I know I'm capable of, so I don't just go in it to make up the numbers. It's very important to me to race at a high level. It's certainly not my day-to-day priority, but I'm certainly looking to transition into other things. And I do have the coaching business, as you mentioned. So our business, understandably, has taken a hit. People are rolling back. I think triathlon coaching at this point is a luxury, particularly if you're losing your job and there's a lot of financial uncertainty. But again, I don't like to look at the downside of that. I think for me, and I've just sort of taken over full control of CEO. I had partners, but I'm running the business now, and that's been since about December. So I've just seen it as an opportunity to sort of regroup, maybe default back to what I want the business to look like moving forward in, say, 12 months from now and 5 years, 10 years from now. What will I be proud of about the business? What do I want it to look like? How do I want to interact with other athletes? What do we want to offer? So it's given us the opportunity to do that. And, as I said, I like to be positive. I think one thing I have seen, particularly in Australia and around where I live in Sydney, is more people out exercising than ever before.
It's incredible, isn't it? Absolutely incredible.
And I was going to ask you if that's the same. I think that's an Australia-wide phenomenon. It might be a worldwide phenomenon, people getting out and walking, running. I've seen more people riding. I certainly know on social media there's been a lot of talk in and around the UK on trying to extend the bike lanes now and active transport infrastructure. So these things, for better or worse, they always give us a foothold or a platform to what our society can look like moving forward. So there's an opportunity for everyone there. And if there's the right people with the right foresight making the decisions, I think we can get a shift in the way we do things in terms of healthy lifestyle, health and fitness, and not even health and fitness to run a marathon or a half, but just for a healthy lifestyle, just to lessen the burden on the healthcare system, just for quality of life, health and fitness. I mean, from what I've seen in our backyard, just people walking, families riding bikes in the evening, a lot of people swimming in the ocean, a lot of people surfing, and it's awesome. It's awesome to see. I mean, at some point or another, we all got so busy that life just became.
To do those things.
Yeah, we did. And we were like, I guess, a guinea pig on a treadmill day after day. And, and I don't think any of us were immune to that, because you've got responsibilities, mouths to feed.
That's right.
But I think this is a chance I know you asked the question about our business. It's a chance for me to, I guess, take stock and say, well, what do I want this business to look like moving forward? Now's the chance to maybe put some plans in place, long-term plans that we can get a foothold and put a line in the sand of what we stand for. I always feel we were a lifestyle company who were high on performance. I mean, obviously we were born out of high performance, and that can mean a lot of things too. That can mean, high performance can mean someone who's a corporate working 70 hours a week wanting to do their local park run.
Yep.
For me, that's performance implications, and fitting the training in around a very busy lifestyle and a family life, and maybe getting the whole family on board, family activities. So yeah, I guess in the short term, we're restructuring a little bit, and we've lost some athletes, but moving forward, I don't think health and fitness is going anywhere. I think it's going to be a big part of everybody's life. And that's a world that I want to live in, a world where we take health and fitness seriously, because I love to watch sport and I like to watch high performance sport, but I just think there's so many, if we've learned anything out of this situation the last 3 or 6 months, is that being healthy and having a really strong immune system can have benefits outside just being an athlete. So, we're just trying to lay down some nice foundations now. So the next 6 months we can, regroup and get back in the game, but also just forge ahead with a mission and a personality that is true to what, the reason that the business was set up.
Yeah, absolutely. I've always admired the company branding San Sigo. Tell us a little bit about that from from a philosophical point of view, because I think a lot of it rings true with where people are probably at in their lives right now through all this coronavirus.
Yeah, my manager, Franco, actually coined the phrase. He and I have been together for 15 years and we're good friends, as well as having a professional relationship. He knows me very well, has navigated the business side of my career for a long time. And, he just said that whenever I was forced with any sort of evaluation of a performance or any sort of planning session moving forward, what he noticed with me was I was able to take my ego out of the equation and just do things solely based on performance. What is going to be the best things that I can implement now to lead to the outcomes that I want, and they were all performance outcomes. And he said often that involved going to someone like a Dave Scott and dropping all pretense and all ego and just getting a very brutal analysis of the things that you need to do to improve. And he said he always saw that with me, that I could remove all sort of emotion, well, not the emotion, but the ego. I always had the emotion because I was passionate about it. So it wasn't an emotionless conversation, but I could remove the ego and I guess take the criticism or the critiquing and get over that because I could see the big picture. It was always about the performance. That's where the name came from. Sans in French means without. So it means making performance decisions without ego. It doesn't mean without emotion, but it means having those tough conversations that we all often have to have in life and in business. To make real progress, often you have to take your ego out of the equation and just get the advice that often you don't want to hear, but you often need to hear. And it's one thing
much easier said than done, right? Much easier said than done. Yeah,
absolutely. Because I think as a high performer in any field, you do need a bit of ego when you're actually in the heat of battle, when you're on the start line or when you're in the boardroom, or you need to believe, you need some really deep-seated self-confidence, not arrogance, but a confidence that you belong there, a confidence that comes from preparation and maybe ability. So there is an ego involved there that when it gets tough, that you can raise your own game and do what it takes. But I think outside of the racing arena, in those planning sessions and all that preparation, there is a time for just dropping the ego and doing only prerequisite is just what's going to, I guess, enable me to go quicker. So they can be tough conversations, but that's where the name came from. Sans actually is a French word, without ego. And you know what? And I saw Franco live that as well. It was such a good name because it became the name of the coaching business, but he used to live the ethos as well because, I mean, I've done a lot of speaking, corporate speaking where, photos are going up of my Kona wins and World Championship wins and Lifetime Fitness, and Franco's never in the photos. He's never trying to bask in the glory. He's in the background. So for me, it just, when he came up with the name, I thought it's so authentic, and so it had more meaning to me that he came up with the name because he lives that way as well. And I thought that's it's really authentic, and it's a great name. I love the name.
Yeah, I remember seeing it for the first time, and I looked at it first off and go, "Oh, Sans," and then I remember it just hitting me like a bullet, and I was like, "Oh yeah, Sans, yeah, I can totally get it." It was a thing which I reflected when we had Simon Lessing on the podcast. We talked a lot about the idea that when we were on this British elite triathlon team, he was obviously on the performance team, we're on the junior team, but a lot of the junior athletes, myself included, we seem to walk around with this massive ego, feeling like we've already won a world championship when none of us had actually done that. We really wore that ego on our sleeve, as it were, and it wasn't a positive thing by any stretch of the imagination. You talk on your website about the idea of actually feeling a lot less cluttered when you actually remove some of that, and you can, like you say, focus on the performance and drive it forwards from there. Do you find yourself having a lot of these conversations with the athletes that you take on board online when maybe you've not met them face to face necessarily? Is it a discussion point which you bring up?
It becomes a discussion point, and I talk about it a lot with our coaches as well. It's just something I think that it's one of those things you can talk about it and you can live it as well. And the example hopefully comes across. It's the old saying, our actions speak louder than words, and they do. And I mean, you talked about what it was like, in the British setting with the younger athletes. And I think all young athletes are like that. I think with the benefit of experience and hindsight, and then someone like Simon, who had achieved so much, in my opinion, one of the greatest triathletes of all time, certainly in the top three.
Absolutely.
He had a deep-seated confidence that enabled him to do what he did. And, I think sometimes when you're younger, you're not as self-aware as when with a bit more experience under your belt. And I think we've all been in that place where, and it's certainly, the sans ego philosophy is not coming from a place where I'm trying to lecture to people. It comes from my own self-awareness and understanding the things that I used to do as well. Being a younger athlete, you try and project that confidence. You try and project that I belong. Maybe when you haven't got the results to back it up, but you are desperately trying to belong. So at that point, that's all you do have. So, it's an interesting philosophy. I just am a firm believer that we're all different. Athletically, we're different. Physiologically, mentally, we're all different. Emotionally, and a big part of our philosophy just comes from an honest self-awareness of the things that we need to be better.
Definitely. Now, you've obviously set up Sans Ego as a training platform online. Can you tell us a little bit about how hard and challenging it was to actually set it up as a software as a service type of platform and stuff? Obviously, you're doing a lot more than just simply offering a software. You have got that face-to-face interaction as well, etc. But what was it like actually building the platform itself? Can you take us back to when you were doing that?
Yeah, well, I would love to say that I was involved in a lot of that, but I had a couple of really good business partners at the time who did a lot of that. So I just outsourced for the expertise that I needed. Because when we set the business up in about 2014, obviously these things are time consuming and I was still racing. And even though I was phasing out of Kona race, like that was the last year I did Ironman racing, I still wanted to race at quite a high level for a good few years. And I felt my main two priorities outside of family, which is always, I guess, your main priority. Professionally, my main two priorities were the races that I did do. I wanted to be committed to those. And also my sponsorship relationships. I had some great partners who had supported me, some of them for over a decade. And whilst I guess you do repay a lot of that in good faith when you're able to win world titles, a lot of the leverage that they're looking for in, I guess, a partnership is not just the winning. That's important, but they want to utilize the partnership in other ways, maybe at expos, trade shows, you going to their key retailers and meet and greets with their actual audience. And I think that's an important part of sponsorship as well. So I committed to being more available to those things that you typically don't have time for when you're training to win world championships. So on the business standpoint, I outsourced and got some help. And they did a great job. We had an IT guy, Chris, who helped launch a lot of the platform. And last year, as I started rolling back the racing, and that's an inevitable, I guess, part of my evolution with my age. And it's not just because of my age, it's just where I am in my life now. You can only get on the race course with very competitive, hungry individuals. That's a different beast. And I think I fit into that world very well for 20 odd years.
Yeah.
But at some point, there's other things and and just in other versions of myself that I wanted to be as well. So yeah, I've assumed total ownership of Sensego now. And so I'm in the process of paring it back, getting the website redone, and not overhauling things, because in essence, our philosophy is still going to be the same.
Sure.
Our mission statement, all those things that we wrote 5 years ago still ring true. And so none of that is going to change, our philosophy.
I'm going to put a link to that philosophy in the show notes, actually, Craig, because it, like I say, it does really ring a bell to, to me personally, but hopefully a lot of our listeners out there as well. I think it's a fantastic mission statement and something to definitely try and live by for, as best we can do,
Well, I think in this time, like you mentioned, it can ring true, because a lot of the times our feedback and our goals are oriented around performances in races, and those races have been removed now. So,
of course. Yeah.
I mean, and don't get me wrong, I'm as goal driven as a lot of people, but I also have other goals that are more intrinsic around performance. And I know all the work you do, there's a lot of things that we can do to focus on with technique, efficiency. Right. We can tie up goals around elements of performance that often get moved to the side when you're just looking at a race result or trying to qualify for a world championship. And it's more that bottom line that we're looking at, rather than the myriad of things that go into the bottom line. So I think that's where I felt, as a mentor and a coach, and even with my own training in this period through COVID-19, when you remove the racing, it doesn't mean you have to make what you're doing less impactful or less meaningful. You just have to have a little bit of a mind shift. So I know that was something you wanted to talk about, and it's something that's been very influential and helpful to me throughout 25 years as a pro athlete, that sort of mindset.
Definitely. I think, obviously, like you say, because the events have actually disappeared off the calendar at the moment and stuff, there was definitely a noticeable feeling and sentiment over here in Perth that, okay, there was no races, we're going to stop training. But, on the flip side of it, a lot of people actually started to ramp up and actually getting on Zwift or doing a run, and all these sort of things, and just getting a little bit more involved on that side of things. It is a funny thing, because I'm super goal driven as well. In fact, I was training up for, it would be actually next weekend, the Best Fest Open Water Series in Mallorca, which I noticed you were there last year. Yeah. Beautiful spot, beautiful part of the world, and I've been going there for the last 4 years, and I love this place. And every year we go, and there's a different open water race every day, ranging between 1,500 and 10,000 meters. And this year, I just got myself, I wasn't injured, I was in good space and stuff like that. I was training up for it, and then suddenly it was off the cards basically. And I'm guilty as charged basically. I've fallen off the perch for sure. I've been trying to rescue and save the business and do the stuff which I need to do to keep, like you say, to keep food on the table and all that sort of stuff. But it's been a funny old time with all that dropping off. How did you enjoy Mallorca, by the way? Did you?
It's amazing. It was my first time there. One of our coaches, one of the foundation coaches with Sensego, Frank Jacobson, he lives up there, and he'd been trying to get me up there for 5 or 6 years, and it was just hard stepping back from serious racing 6 or 7 years ago now. It was just hard to travel away from the family, because I'd already spent a lot of time away. But I finally got up there last year. We ran a camp, and actually I was meant to be there right now. So isn't it interesting? We're having a Zoom call from our home offices, but we could have actually been face to face
in Mallorca. Yeah. Absolutely.
We'll get back there again. It's an incredible location. The open water swimming is incredible. The bike riding is incredible.
Do you do the Sacalabra ride?
Sacalabra, incredible.
Oh, it's amazing, eh?
Incredible ride. The Puig Major, the Capsule Mentor, rides that I'd seen on the net, on social media. I finally got to do them, and it was just amazing. And you'd be riding along and you'd see professional and ex-professional cyclists and triathletes just out on the road, mate. It was, one of my favorite training weeks ever was really, in New York last year. So I'll definitely get back there. Hopefully, we can lock horns in a few of these open water swim races next year.
Yeah, that's right. So talking a little bit about what you mentioned, obviously you've raced, on average between 3 and 5 times a year, just even though you've tied things down a little bit. Are you planning on doing some open water racing potentially? What sort of the 3 sports, if you could no longer do triathlon, which of the 3 would you sort of gravitate towards more if you're doing solo events?
I think I would do open water swim races, and I would probably try and run a good half, maybe even a good open marathon on the road.
All right. Okay. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, it's the one thing that I said my whole career, once I'm done with triathlon, I'm done with running. It's very hard on the body because of the impact,
Very hard.
obviously.
Yeah.
But, I do, I guess, have that seed planted that it'd be kind of nice to train for one event
On
and
discipline. Yeah.
have all that extra time. And I know I didn't swim growing up. I played a little bit of water polo in high school, and I was in a swim club. But it wasn't until I started doing triathlon as a 19 or 20-year-old, or actually doing those biathlons as a 19-year-old, that I actually got in a swim squad for the first time. And I know one of the things, one of your disciples, actually, Chris Southwell.
Oh yes. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, filmed me swimming a little while ago. And it's something I wish I had
You
got
mentioned.
done years
Yeah.
ago. And it's interesting. It's the one discipline.
Tell us about that. What did that feel like, having somebody taken some video footage of you and never really done it before? What was it like?
It was so insightful that I kind of was mad at myself for not having it done 10 years before.
Wow.
Because you have a picture in your mind's eye of what you think you look like and all the things that you do, and your tendencies. A lot of the swim squads I was involved in were within, obviously with swimmers, single discipline athletes or surf lifesavers who are great swimmers.
Yep. Yep.
Guys and girls who swim close to 4 minutes or in the mid 4 minutes. So I'm just sort of swimming on their coattails, trying to get I always thought that if I was in 430 or 440 shape for a 400 meters,
You're in good stead here.
I was in any front group in a triathlon.
Sure.
So a lot of the focus just became on doing the work, getting a lot of strength. I would do a lot of swimming with paddles because obviously in the open water, you don't get the benefit of your own lane. And where technique and rhythm is always important, but often in an open water swimming setting, you've got five guys on your back. You're rounding a swim can, so you're losing momentum. You've got to get up and running again. A lot of strength, maybe turnover rather than length of stroke. So all those open water nuances. But then efficiency is always important, isn't it? I mean, and when I saw the video of myself swimming, it was nothing like I thought I looked like. And
what specifically did you think then? Where were you?
I moved my head a lot more than I thought I did. My hand entry and my catch wasn't what I thought it was. I hurt my back in 2012 in the gym, and I've always felt since that point I didn't have the rotation and the hip drive in swimming. And looking at this, I was a lot flatter in the water than I thought. And I wasn't getting the full extension on the catch. I wasn't getting that hip rotation. And granted, when Chris filmed me, I hadn't had a massage in about 2 years, so I was probably as tight as a board. But it's just one of those things where I think, the goal in any event that's a repetitive motion, so doing the same thing over and again, and especially the same thing over again for a long period of time, it becomes about efficiency and quality of movement. And I always knew in the swimming sense I was compromised a little in the upper body because I didn't have that swim technique from a young age, and I didn't have the flexibility in my shoulders that a 12 or 13 or a 14-year-old learning to swim would have. So when Chris filmed me, I just saw straight away that there was an opportunity to get performance gains without the hard slog. And look, the hard slog is always, as you know, it's the cornerstone and the foundation of success, that doing the work, getting in that consistency of training and all of the disciplines. But it's also about reinforcing good habits over time. It's also about, if you're going to do that work and you can get 1%, 2%, even 3%. I mean, watching that video of myself, I thought I can get way more efficient. And it was one of the things that I started doing was swimming a lot more with a snorkel, and not being as mindless. Like these days, the last 5 years, a lot of my training has been as much a mental release from business and other things that are going on. So I just jump in the pool and mindlessly swim. And I thought, no, I've got to default back to a time where I was fully engaged mentally in every session. Swim, bike, run. I had technical things that I wanted to check off on all of them. Cadence, turnover, length, all those things where the last 3 or 4 years I've drifted away from that mindset, and I might have just come from a meeting or something else where I'm just diving in for a master squad, and I just want to hang with
The
the crew.
release.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I just
yeah,
want
yeah.
the release. So I'm not thinking streamline. I'm not thinking. I just want to be here, and
Sure.
I know I'm going to another meeting after this. But it sort of gave me a chance watching that film that no, I'm still an athlete, a performance athlete at heart, and I need to get back to the core of all of these things, which is mental engagement with the technical aspect of these three sports. So yeah, it was. I said to Chris, "Do not send that footage to Paul. I do not. I want to have a chance to rectify a few things, and we'll do a reshoot, and then we'll send some footage."
It's so funny because it's almost exactly the same response that Dave Scott gave me when we filmed him over in Boulder. He said, "Don't ever let anybody see my wicked stroke." And I said, "Dave, you're 6-time Ironman World Champion, and often first out of the water as well. You must be doing something right with your stroke." And I remember back in 2013, your friend and obviously somebody who I bow down to as well, Simon Whitfield, posted something up on Twitter saying he'd obviously seen a pool swimming squad or triathlon swimming squad going on or something. He said the title of the tweet was very, very simple. It said, triathletes, if you're being yelled at telling you to lengthen out your stroke, glide more and kick less, unless you're being told to do the opposite, it's the game of doing the opposite, you're being told the wrong thing, basically.
Yeah.
So Simon Whitfield was talking about the idea that, lengthening out and gliding too much and kicking really hard is not something you want to be doing as a triathlete. It might not necessarily look as pretty as what some of the pool counterparts do, but, I think Dave Scott's got a wonderful stroke, and I wanted to sort of show, we were both at a triathlon expo in the UK a few years ago, and I said, "Dave, can we get you in the endless pool and I'll just talk about your stroke?" And he said, "I'm not terrible." He calls himself a hack. And I said, "You're not a hack, Dave. You can't be a hack if with all this." But there we go, And I think, like you say, rhythm and timing, absolutely essential elements and stuff. And even though something might not have been your background necessarily, you've obviously taken it to a very, very high level indeed, and done what you needed to do to get to that level of that. And we speak all the time. We've got a young kid in the squad at the moment. He won the Australian Open Water Championships last year, so he's 18 years of age. He's just only over 5 foot tall, so he's like 5'2". He's a tiny, tiny little guy. He's had a bit of a growth spurt recently. His name's Byron Kimber, but he specifically came and joined our squad a couple of years back because the coaches at a previous club were telling him, "Byron, you're never going to amount to anything. You're not tall enough. You're taking 55 strokes to complete a lap and stuff, and you've got a stroke rate of over 100. But I actually believe that's one of the reasons why he's as good as what he is at the open water, because his stroke is really rhythmical. And we've seen people come alongside him who are a foot taller than him, much longer stroke, much smoother looking stroke, and something that actually people would say, "Oh, he's more efficient than him." And yet they can't get anywhere near him, because he's just found the right stroke for himself. So don't be afraid to send your video across there. I'd love to sort of see it. Yeah.
I guess it's the competitive nature in all of us.
Yeah, for sure.
You're right. Dave must be doing. I mean, ultimately, what happens under the water is very important. If you're getting enough forward drive to be in the front group or where you need to be and set your race up, that was the goal. But you can always be better. And that, for me, that was one of the challenges of triathlon. You're looking at three disciplines, and I used to look at who are the best proponents in swimming, who are the best cyclists in the world, and you want to get somewhere between where the best triathletes are and where the best individual or single discipline athletes are. But it's a great point you make about that open water swimmer, because I mean that's the essence of coaching, isn't it? I mean, I think over time certain theories get generated, and with experience you see certain patterns develop, and in theory, someone might come along who breaks the mold. And I mean, that's the essence of coaching. It's easy to take a genetic freak or someone who's built to do something and then just enhance that. But a good coach can still get the most out of someone who maybe doesn't fit the mold. And for me, that's great coaching. It'd be wonderful to, I guess if you're a swimmer, to be 6'4" and have the wingspan of the albatross, or or the kick of an Alex Popoff. But a great coach can take someone who maybe doesn't have that and still improve them a lot. And to me, that's the success. It's getting the most out of each individual. So, and you tend to see that a lot in high-level sports, don't you? That people get pigeonholed because they don't fit a certain criteria, I guess. And there's a lot of things that, no question, to get to the very, very highest level, there's certain boxes you need to check, but success looks a whole lot different to different people. And there's always ways to improve, and there's many things that you can't, see immediately, like work ethic, desire, doing the things that no one's else willing to do for a long period of time, resilience, perseverance, all those things come into it. And I think, as you know, a good coach, it's their job to I guess, be abreast of all of those things.
Yeah, for sure. Now, I appreciate you got to probably get away, Crowie, so thanks ever so much for spending so much time with them. I'm just going to ask you one final question, though. You're actually at home with your kids, and I know family is obviously a big thing for yourself. How has it been during this period with the kids at home? Have you been doing some homeschooling and those type of things?
Yeah, absolutely. My wife's an emergency nurse. She works in emergency at Sutherland Hospital, so she's been working a lot. She's been working about 6 days a week, so yeah, a lot of the homeschooling has, I guess, by default fallen into my lap. It's tough. I'll say straight off the bat, we should be paying our teachers a lot more. We should be paying our nurses a lot more. But I guess in this day and age with technology the way it is, my oldest daughter, who's in year 10, she's 15, a lot of her work's online. She has Zoom calls set up each day with her teachers. So I don't really have much of a role there. Just make sure when she gets to the pantry that a lot of her snacks are healthy. That's my main role with Lucy. The two youngest, our son, he's in the middle. He's 11. A lot of his...
year 6, is he?
He's in year 5.
Year 5, okay, yeah.
A lot of his learning self-directed and online as well. So I just have to oversee with Oz. He's very active, so it's hard keeping him at the table for long periods of time. So, and our youngest, Lani, she just turned 7. I have to sit with her for most of her work, but she's very smart. We're lucky. They're all good self-directed learners, and a lot of the curriculum's online now. So with Lani,
our youngest, impressive, hasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the education department's set it up. I guess they understand that parents are not teachers, and they've made it as easy as possible for us. And the whole period in general, though, I've got to say I've loved spending more time with the kids. We've tried to get in a good routine early and get a lot of the work done. Lucy, our eldest, she starts at 8:20, so I start the other two at that time, and we try and get a lot of it done by 11:30, and then try and get outside.
Are they back at school yet, or have they gone back to school yet?
Lucy, our eldest, goes back on Wednesday, so in 2 days, and the two youngest, they're back a day a week now, so they started last week. They had their first days, and they're at this current level, they've eased the restrictions, but we're only a day a week. So, and we're just trying to be active too. We're lucky. I guess we're coming into winter here, but we've had great weather. So I've been surfing a lot with my son. He's into surfing. He paddles a board a lot too. So been getting out and about, a lot of family bike rides. The two eldest, Lucy and Austin, are both very good runners. So been running as a family. Yeah. So.
Oh, wow. Cool.
We've just been trying to exercise, keep it fun. I think it's important for the kids to exercise, not from the standpoint of performance, but from the standpoint of just being kids and getting out there. And so we mix it up. It could be a run, could be a bike ride, go to the beach, could be a surf. We just try and mix it up and keep it. Although our eldest is quite a high-level runner, she's gone to national all schools and state all schools for track and cross country. So she's got her own little training routine, which she keeps, and I try and jump in and do some runs with her. But yeah, it's more about just keeping it fun, but as I guess a nice balance offsetting the home classroom work.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we've had a similar sort of thing. We're lucky to have a small pool out the back here. So the kids were doing a triathlon, so they did a few laps to the pool and bike ride around the lake, and then a little run to the coffee shop, and then back again, sort of thing, which is pretty cool. Yeah, I've also had my toenails all painted by my little daughter. She's 8 years of age. She painted them all black, so I look like I'm emo at the moment or something like that. In fact, actually, she painted black. We did that on the Easter weekend. And funny enough, I've actually I thought rather than actually wipe it off, I've actually kept it. So they're actually growing out is this black. And I think once this black has all disappeared, then hopefully Australia and the rest of the world might be back on a bit of an even keel and moving forwards. But, I think, most of my family's still back over in the UK compared to what they've got at the moment over here. We're very, very lucky to be over here in Australia with
absolutely.
and stuff with the government and stuff. So, yeah, but there we go. Excellent. Well, Crowie, thanks ever so much for spending so much time with us today, telling us a little bit about your background and your history, and obviously about Sunseego and the philosophy behind all of that. I will put all of those in the show notes as well and point people over to the website and stuff, because I think it is a fantastic philosophy to abide by, not just in normal day life, but especially right now and stuff. So yeah, thanks very much for taking the time, and it's been an honour having you on the show, sir.
Oh, thanks, Paul. It's great to reconnect. I mean, we do go back a little way, and meeting in Boulder, but obviously you've been in the sport a long time too, and we know a lot of the same people. So appreciate getting an invite and getting on the guest list.
Thanks very much, Crowie. That's awesome. Thanks.
Take care, mate.
Thanks for watching, swimmers. If you've enjoyed this video, please do like and subscribe to the channel below, and also consider checking out our Swim Smooth Guru at the link below too.